Make the case for why you are an originalist.
Why everybody should be an originalist, Jeffrey. All right. And I'm here to tell those who doubt, this is not a political thing. This has no political valence at all. This is a Constitution thing in my mind. And let's start at the beginning. What is originalism? Well, it's a terrible name, I think. The other side's got something they call living constitutionalism. Well, that sounds kind of nice. Who wants a dead constitution? I like to think of it as enduring constitutionalism, something like that. The other problem with originalism, of course, is it suggests that we all think that the original Constitution was perfect as written and does not bear any need for improvement, which ignores to me the vital importance of the 13th, the 14th, the 15th, and the 19th Amendments, which were really our second Constitution. Originalism honors them every bit as much as James Madison's handiwork. So let's just get that out of the way. What does originalism mean? It just means that a judge should honor the words on the page as they were originally understood and apply them as best he or she can to contemporary circumstances. Now, when we talk about any other written law, that's exactly what judges all agree they're supposed to do. I can cite you 100 if I can cite you one Supreme Court case that says when it comes to statutes or contracts, judges should apply the terms found in them according to their original public meaning. And I ask you, why shouldn't the same be true of our written Constitution? Our founding fathers rejected an unwritten Constitution that might evolve. They knew that example. That was England. They said there are certain things that bear writing down and holding fast to forever. There aren't very many. The Constitution's short. But those few things are vital and should never be taken away and should never be supplanted except for by we the people. Those are the first three words of our Constitution. Not we the judges, not we in Washington, not we the bureaucrats, not we the states, we the people. So originalism, I think, honors the writtenness of our Constitution. So here's why I'm an originalist. The real world cases that I think make a difference to me and might to you. What happens when you depart, when you say it's okay for judges to depart from the original public meaning of the Constitution? Well, the first thing is you start losing some rights, because judges may see other things as more important than what's written down there. And let me give you a couple examples. The Sixth Amendment of the Constitution protects your right to a jury trial when you are accused of a crime, and a right to confront your accusers. Living constitutionalists on the Supreme Court of the United States have sometimes held that your right to a jury trial gives way. Sometimes you're only going to get a judge, and we'll tell you when. There are other considerations that are more important and need to be balanced against those words. Your right to confront your accusers, pretty much the same thing happened for a very long time. Living constitutionalists held at the Supreme Court of the United States that sometimes a piece of paper written by a police officer can be introduced in evidence against you. Good luck cross-examining a piece of paper. And can be even the key evidence that sends you to prison for 25 years or more. Originalism says no to that. Originalism says, I might not like that criminal myself. I may feel sorry for the police officer who has to come. I may wish that it weren't so expensive to have a jury trial. Those are my feelings, and I should put them over here when I put on my robe. I should follow the law and not make it up. Here's the other funny thing that happens when you move away from the original meaning of the Constitution. Not only do you lose rights that are in it, judges start putting things there that aren't in it. The first major departure from the original meaning of the Constitution by the United States Supreme Court was a case called Dred Scott. And Jeffrey has a wonderful exhibit downstairs on Dred Scott that I encourage every one of you to see. It's incredibly moving. Thank you for sharing that with me today.
Thank you for seeing it.
In Dred Scott, the Supreme Court of the United States held that a white person has the right to own a black person in the territories of the United States, and that right exists because of the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution, and more specifically, its due process clause. Well, I ask you, search that clause, search its original public meaning, and you tell me where you can find that right there. And the answer is you can't, because it doesn't exist. Now, to be fair, the justices on the Supreme Court who used a living constitution to hold otherwise thought they were doing something more important. They thought they were helping avert a civil war. But the truth is, judges make rotten politicians, and we're much better sticking to our lane. And instead of averting a civil war, they contributed to it, as we all know. Originalism says no to that. It says the judge's job is to make sure your rights are the same today, tomorrow, and always.
The Supreme Court has now shot down an effort by President Trump's allies in Pennsylvania in that overall effort to try to overturn the election.
They sure did. This was brutal, David, no question about it. It took the Supreme Court just 34 minutes between the time that President Trump's allies in Pennsylvania filed their brief in this case and a one-sentence order from the Supreme Court rejecting that entire case. No reasoning, just no, get out of here. And there were no recorded dissents by any of the justices, including Amy Coney Barrett and Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh, all of whom were appointed by President Trump. There's no doubt that this is a clear message from the Supreme Court that they want no part of this campaign in the courts to overturn the election. Trump's allies were trying to get millions of votes invalidated in Pennsylvania, and in this brusque way, the Supreme Court just said no.
Now, to be fair, the justices on the Supreme Court who used a living constitution to hold otherwise thought they were doing something more important. They thought they were helping avert a civil war. But the truth is, judges make rotten politicians, and we're much better sticking to our lane. And instead of averting a civil war, they contributed to it, as we all know. Originalism says no to that. It says the judge's job is to make sure your rights are the same today, tomorrow, and always.
The experiment is the brainchild of Jake Braun. He's a former security advisor for the Obama administration.
You know, with everything that happened in 16, what we're trying to do is get this industry to mature from a cybersecurity perspective so you don't have folks saying what they are now, which is things like machines are unhackable or databases.
The Department of Homeland Security also found that they targeted election-related systems in as many as 21 states.
If you wanted to go in and specifically manipulate vote counts on every single machine in America, that'd be really hard to do.
Right.
But you don't need to do that to have an impact on the election in 18 either. You only have to flip a couple Senate seats to have an impact on U.S. Congress.
Removing the card reader, removing this, you don't need any tools to do this. Unplugging this, again, you don't need any tools to do this. Turning it on, all you have to do is pick this lock here with a ballpoint pen. Open this up, press the red button, and we're gonna let it boot up here. Just click cancel and OK. And now I have full admin access, under 2 minutes.
Holy shit!
When reached for comment, manufacturer Election Systems and Software told CNN Tech, unrestricted access to a voting unit in an uncontrolled environment is not a legitimate test. We've extended an invitation to the organizers of DEF CON, inviting them to visit our home office, meet our developers, and engage in a collaborative discussion regarding voting system security. To date, we have not received a response. Dominion Voting Systems did not respond to our request for comment.
In 2016, 20% of voters voted on paperless DREs, and an estimated 12% will use them in 2020, meaning 16 million Americans spread out across all these states are set to be voting on machines that pretty much everyone agrees are deeply, deeply flawed, and if they malfunction, there could be no way of knowing.
The plan is to eventually present the event's findings to Congress.
I introduced a bill called the Securing America's Election Act that, if our country's leaders had passed, would have prevented a lot of the angst that people are feeling and seeing right now with this election, saying that you have to have a paper trail. You have to have an auditable paper backup for any electronic system so that there's no doubt or question in mind if there has been a hack attempt or some attempt to manipulate our votes as voters. If all of these people in Congress, Democrat and Republican, had taken that issue seriously and passed that legislation, those who are now saying, hey, we have to stand up for the integrity, why didn't you do something about it before? We do need to stand up and fight for the well-being of this country, stand up for our Constitution, uphold it, but we need to do it in a way that is constructive and within the institutions that have been set up in this society that is America.
If we don't get our act together quickly, this could be one of the biggest threats to American democracy in our history.
Do you believe that right now we are in a position where the 2020 election will be hacked?
Oh, without question. I mean, the 2020 election will be hacked no matter what we do, even if we're as more successful than I even think we could be in securing our elections. The question is, will we be able to identify the attacks before they can have an impact on the election through things like audits of vote counts? And can we get the bad guys out before they can do something bad?
What we have to do here is obvious. It's so obvious, in fact, even this guy understands it.
One of the things we're learning is it's always good. It's old-fashioned, but it's always good to have a paper backup system of voting. It's called paper, not highly complex computers, paper. And a lot of states are doing that.
Yeah. He's right. That's it. He's just all the way completely right. It is called paper. Paper is not a computer. It's paper, and a lot of states are doing it. Now, I'm sure everything he said around those 16 seconds was some combination of wrong, racist, and horny, but for a brief, glorious moment, he was just absolutely right and probably slightly horny.
But this year, using the pretext of the China virus and the scam of mail-in ballots, Democrats attempted the most brazen and outrageous election theft, and there's never been anything like this. It's a pure theft in American history. Everybody knows it. That election, our election, was over at 10 o'clock in the evening. We're leading Pennsylvania, Michigan, Georgia, by hundreds of thousands of votes. And then late in the evening or early in the morning, boom, these explosions of bullshit. And all of a sudden, it started to happen. Don't forget when Romney got beat. Romney, did you see his? I wonder if he enjoyed his flight in last night. But when Romney got beaten, you know, he stands up like your more typical. Well, I'd like to congratulate the victor. The victor. Who was the victor, Mitt? I'd like to congratulate. They don't go and look at the facts. Now, I don't know. He got slaughtered, probably. Maybe it was okay. Maybe it was, that's what happened. But we look at the facts, and our election was so corrupt that in the history of this country, we've never seen anything like it. You can go all the way back. You know, America is blessed with elections all over the world. They talk about our elections. You know what the world says about us now? They say we don't have free and fair elections, and you know what else? We don't have a free and fair press. Our media is not free, it's not fair. It suppresses thought, it suppresses speech, and it's become the enemy of the people. It's become the enemy of the people. It's the biggest problem we have in this country. No third world countries would even attempt to do what we caught them doing. And you'll hear about that in just a few minutes. Republicans are Republicans are constantly fighting like a boxer with his hands tied behind his back. It's like a boxer. And we want to be so nice. We want to be so respectful of everybody, including bad people. And we're going to have to fight much harder. And Mike Pence is going to have to come through for us. And if he doesn't, that will be a sad day for our country, because you're sworn to uphold our Constitution. Now it is up to Congress to confront this egregious assault on our democracy. And after this, we're going to walk down, and I'll be there with you. We're going to walk down. We're going to walk down anyone you want, but I think right here we're going to walk down to the Capitol, and we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women. And we're probably not going to be cheering so much for some of them, because you'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength, and you have to be strong. We have come to demand that Congress do the right thing and only count the electors who have been lawfully slated. Lawfully slated. I know that everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard. Today we will see whether Republicans stand strong for integrity of our elections, but whether or not they stand strong for our country.
For what reason does the gentleman from Alabama rise?
Mr. President, I and 55 other members of the United States House of Representatives object to the electoral votes of the state of Nevada in order to protect the lawful votes of Nevada and all other American citizens.
Section 15 and 17 of Title III of the United States Code requires that any objection be presented in writing and signed by a member of the House of Representatives and a senator. Is the objection in writing and signed by a member and a senator?
Mr. President, it is in writing, but unfortunately, no United States senator has joined in this effort.
In that case, the objection cannot be entertained.
Was completely condemnable. There was no reason for this kind of outburst there.
No, whatever the violence is definitely, it's abominable. It's really bad what happened, and it destroyed our movement because of that. So nobody is condoning the violence, but we have all the right to protest voter fraud that happened. If you're interested to hear about the voter fraud, I am an insider. I am a party operative. I know in whatever means the voter fraud has happened. We can have another discussion.
I think the judiciary.
Another important point for the country is that this morning, President Trump explicitly called for demonstrations and protests to be peaceful. He was far more, you can moan and groan, but he was far more explicit about his calls for peace than some of the BLM and left-wing rioters were this summer when we saw violence sweep across this nation. Now, we came here today to debate, to follow regular order, to offer an objection, to follow a process that is expressly contemplated in our Constitution. And for doing that, we got called a bunch of seditious traitors. Now, not since 1985 has a Republican president been sworn in, absent some Democrat effort, to object to the electors. But when we do it, it is the new violation of all norms. And when those things are said, people get angry. Now, I know there are many countries where political violence may be necessary, but America is not one such country. Madam Speaker, it was wrong when people vandalized and defaced your home. It was wrong when thugs went to Senator Hawley's home. And I don't know if the reports are true, but the Washington Times has just reported some pretty compelling evidence from a facial recognition company showing that some of the people who breached the Capitol today were not Trump supporters. They were masquerading as Trump supporters and, in fact, were members of the violent terrorist group Antifa. Now, we should seek to build America up, not tear her down and destroy her. And I am sure glad that at least for one day, I didn't hear my Democrat colleagues calling to defund the police. Now, I appreciate all the talk. Now, I appreciate all the talk of coming together, but let us not pretend that our colleagues on the left have been free of some anti-democratic impulses just because we signed on to legal briefs and asked courts to resolve disputes. There were some on the left who said that we should not even be seated in the body, that we ought to be prosecuted, maybe even jailed. Those arguments anger people, but people do understand the concepts of basic fairness. And no competition, contest, or election can be deemed fair if the participants are subject to different rules. Baseball teams that cheat and steal signs should be stripped of their championships. Russian Olympians who cheat and use steroids should be stripped of their medals, and states that do not run clean elections should be stripped of their electors. This fraud was systemic. It was repeated. It was the same system, and I dare say it was effective. We saw circumstances where when Democrat operatives couldn't get the outcomes they wanted in state legislators, when they couldn't get the job done there, they went and pressured and litigated and usurped the Constitution with extra constitutional action of some officials in some states. They fraudulently laundered ballots, votes, voter registration forms, and then they limited review. In 2016, Democrats found out that they couldn't beat Donald Trump at the ballot box with voters who actually show up, so they turned to impeachment and the witness box. And when that failed, they ran to the mailbox, where this election saw an unprecedented amount of votes that could not be authenticated with true ID, with true signature match, and with true confidence for the American people. Our Article III courts have failed by not holding evidentiary hearings to weigh the evidence. We should not join in that failure. We should vindicate the rights of states. We should vindicate the subpoenas in Arizona that have been issued to get a hold of these voting machines, and we should reject these electors. I yield back.
We're only about 150 feet from the hotel and said, oh, sorry, we'll go back. And it was too late. Unfortunately, we were made examples of, thinking we were some of the rowdy crowd.
Matthew Staley from Commerce Township and Sean Floyd from Redford say they got arrested around 8:45 Wednesday night after they left their hotel to try to get something to eat. They told the 7 investigators they traveled to D.C. to peacefully protest, not to incite violence.
I have daughters, I have kids, and this country is not upholding the law, the Constitution, and it's being trampled on. So we came out yesterday to stand up for our rights here in this country that aren't being upheld. We're here for the rights of all Americans. There's no racial prejudice here. It's all, people that love and fear God, and we're here for human rights for the whole world, not just America, but to show the whole world that, the corruption is real.
Staley and Floyd say they were held overnight in a lockup facility and early this morning paid a $25 ticket so they could return to Michigan. They say they did not join in the breach of the Capitol building and don't agree with the violence that occurred.
I do believe that patriots are upset, and I think they want to be heard. I think they think it's an unfair election, and I think going to the Capitol building and showing presence was what the intention was. I think the event provocateurs or instigators or agitators were the ones that decided to break things, enter buildings that they shouldn't have been entering. And I'm disgusted by it, as I think are most Americans.
Are there any objections to counting the certificate of vote of the state of Arizona that the teller has verified appears to be regular in form and authentic?
Mr. Vice President, I, Paul Gosar from Arizona.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona rise?
I rise up for myself and 60 of my colleagues to object to the counting of the electoral ballots from Arizona.
Is the objection in writing and signed by a senator?
Yes, it is.
It is. An objection presented in writing and signed by both a representative and a senator complies with the law, Chapter 1 of Title 3 of the United States Code. The clerk will report the objection.
They can object to Alabama in 2017, but tell us we can't object to Pennsylvania in 2021? Pennsylvania, where the state Supreme Court just unilaterally extended the election to Friday? Pennsylvania, where the Secretary of State unilaterally changed the rules, went around the legislature in unconstitutional fashion? Pennsylvania, where county clerks in some counties, and you can imagine which counties they were, let people fix their ballots against the law, cure their ballots, their mail-in ballots, direct violation of the law. And they tell us we tried to overturn the election. Guess who the second objector was in 2017? The individual managing the impeachment for the Democrats. Americans are tired of the double standard. They are so tired of it. Democrats object to more states in 2017 than Republicans did last week, but somehow we're wrong. Democrats can raise bail for rioters and looters this summer, but somehow when Republicans condemn all the violence this summer, the violence last week, somehow we're wrong. And Democrats can investigate the President of the United States, as Mr. Hoyer went through, try to impeach him, investigate him for 4 years, but will not look at an election that 80 million Americans, half the electorate, 80 million, Republicans and Democrats have their doubts about.
Senator. We gathered together at a moment of great division, at a moment of great passion. We have seen, and no doubt will continue to see, a great deal of moralizing from both sides of the aisle. But I would urge to both sides perhaps a bit less certitude and a bit more recognition that we are gathered at a time when democracy is in crisis. Recent polling shows that 39% of Americans believe the election that just occurred, quote, was rigged. You may not agree with that assessment, but it is nonetheless a reality for nearly half the country. I would note it is not just Republicans who believe that. 31% of independents agree with that statement. 17% of Democrats believe the election was rigged. Even if you do not share that conviction, it is the responsibility, I believe, of this office to acknowledge that is a profound threat to this country and to the legitimacy of any administrations that will come in the future. I want to take a moment to speak to my Democratic colleagues. I understand your guy is winning right now. If Democrats vote as a bloc, Joe Biden will almost certainly be certified as the next president of the United States. I want to speak to the Republicans who are considering voting against these objections. I understand your concerns, but I urge you to pause and think. What does it say to the nearly half the country that believes this election was rigged if we vote not even to consider the claims of illegality and fraud in this election? And I believe there's a better way. The leaders just spoke about setting aside the election. Let me be clear, I am not arguing for setting aside the result of this election. All of us are faced with two choices, both of which are lousy. One choice is vote against the objection. And tens of millions of Americans will see a vote against the objection as a statement that voter fraud doesn't matter, isn't real, and shouldn't be taken seriously. And a great many of us don't believe that. On the other hand, most, if not all of us, believe we should not set aside the results of an election just because our candidate may not have prevailed. And so I endeavored to look for door number 3, a third option, and for that I looked to history, to the precedent of the 1876 election, the Hayes-Tilden election, where this Congress appointed an electoral commission to examine claims of voter fraud. 5 House members, 5 senators, 5 Supreme Court justices examined the evidence and rendered a judgment. And what I would urge of this body is that we do the same. that we appoint an electoral commission to conduct a 10-day emergency audit, consider the evidence, and resolve the claims. For those on the Democratic aisle who say there is no evidence, they've been rejected, then you should rest in comfort. If that's the case, an electoral commission would reject those claims. But for those who respect the voters, simply telling the voters, go jump in a lake, the fact that you have deep concerns is of no moment to us. That jeopardizes, I believe, the legitimacy of this and subsequent elections. The Constitution gives to Congress the responsibility this day to count the votes. The framers knew what they were doing when they gave responsibilities to Congress. We have a responsibility, and I would urge that we follow the precedent of 1877. The Electoral Count Act explicitly allows objections such as this one for votes that were not regularly given. And let me be clear, this objection is for the state of Arizona, but it is broader than that. It is an objection for all 6 of the contested states to have a credible, objective, impartial body hear the evidence and make a conclusive determination. That would benefit both sides. That would improve legitimacy of this election. And so let me urge my colleagues, all of us take our responsibility seriously. I would urge my colleagues, don't take perhaps the easy path, but instead act together, astonish the viewers, and act in a bipartisan sense to say we will have a credible and fair tribunal, consider the claims, consider the facts, consider the evidence, and make a conclusive determination whether and to what extent this election complied with the Constitution and with federal law.
An objection is raised with regard to Pennsylvania. For now, I want to address my remarks to what I think is the fundamental question being posed by the objectors. And that is, does Congress have the constitutional authority to decide which states' electoral college votes should be counted and which should not, based on how well we think they ran their elections? This is what the objectors are really asking us to do, to federalize elections by rejecting electoral college votes from states whose processes they say they disapprove of, and thereby having Congress select the President of the United States instead of the American people. The answer, Mr. President, is no. There is no such authority under the Constitution. The Constitution assigns to the states the responsibility to conduct elections. It's clear in Article 2, Section 1. It leaves courts with the responsibility to adjudicate disputes, and it assigns to Congress the ministerial function of counting ballots, except for extreme circumstances, such as when a state sends competing slates of electors to Congress. Which brings me to the 1877 precedent. Some objectors claim to merely want a commission to conduct an audit and then let states decide whether to send different electors. Well, first, the situations are not at all analogous. In 1877, Congress had before it 2 slates of electors from several states. Here, there are no Trump electors from swing states. There's just Biden electors. Second, legislatures from the swing states, they've already spoken. They've made their decision. They've chosen not to send us alternative electors. Third, a commission? Really? It's completely impractical, and we all know it, with 14 days to go before a constitutionally mandated inauguration. But look at it this way. If the objectors are right, and it really is Congress's job to sit in judgment on the worthiness of the state's electoral processes, then what's the criteria for acceptable election processes? What investigations have been conducted of these processes? What body has deemed that certain states' processes are unacceptable? What opportunities were these states given to challenge the findings? Why are the objectors objecting only to swing states that President Trump lost? What about the ones he won? I don't know, North Carolina. What about California? They have ballot harvesting, I'm told. If this is all supposed to be Congress's job, you'd think we'd have answers to these questions and procedures in place, because we would have done this every 4 years, right? But we don't, because it's not our job. If we adopt this new precedent that we sit in judgment of states' processes, then we're federalizing the election law. We would necessarily have to establish the permissible criteria and rules for the state's elections. The ballot harvesting example. It's illegal in some states. It's encouraged in others. Does it become mandatory or forbidden depending on who's in control of Congress? And as the leader pointed out, it would be the end of the Electoral College. And the Electoral College is the mechanism by which the people select the president. But if Congress gets to decide which states get to vote in the Electoral College, then clearly Congress is selecting the president, not the people. Whichever party controls both houses of Congress would control the presidency. The public would never tolerate Congress picking the president instead of themselves, so they'd abolish the Electoral College, as many of our colleagues would like to do. And the end of the Electoral College, of course, means the nation will be governed by a handful of big blue states and regions that can drum up very large numbers. Mr. President, the Constitution does not assign to Congress the responsibility to judge the worthiness of state election processes, nor its adherence to its rules. That's the responsibility of the states and the courts. Let me conclude with this. I voted for President Trump. I publicly endorsed President Trump. I campaigned for President Trump. I did not want Joe Biden to win this election. But there's something more important to me than having my preferred candidate sworn in as the next president. And that's to have the American people's chosen candidate sworn in as the next president. A fundamental defining feature of a democratic republic is the right of the people to elect their own leaders. It's now our duty, it's our responsibility to ensure that that right is respected in this election and preserved for future elections. I urge you, vote against this objection.
Here's a quote. I just don't even know why there aren't more uprisings all over the country, and maybe there will be. Or, sadly, the domestic enemies of our voting system and honoring our Constitution are right at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue with their allies in Congress of the United States. We were called enemies of the state. Those are all quotes from our speaker. Now, on our side, we didn't take those to be impeachable because we didn't believe she surely meant that. But by the Democrats taking this action, you're telling me, no, when we say those, we actually mean to incite violence. That's what this action is saying. Look, I just looked on the History Channel. It says these words: if the Judiciary Committee, talking about impeachment, finds sufficient grounds, its members write and pass articles of impeachment, which then go to the full House for a vote. Half of all the impeachments ever conducted, ever voted for, occurred under this speaker. You're setting a precedent that says very clearly, because this impeachment isn't going to work, but it is setting the precedent. Unlike a year ago when we said, look, it shouldn't go through Intel, it should go through Judiciary Committee. Forget that. Now the message is, if you have a whim and you want to just go after a president, just go straight to the floor. No investigation, no Judiciary Committee, go straight to the floor. Use it as a political weapon as you wish. This is so dangerous, what you're doing. Forgetting all the precedents, yes, we can argue back and forth, but you're using this as a weapon. And you're destroying this little experiment in self-government in a year's time.
The gentleman's time has expired.
It needs to stop. I yield back.
The gentleman from...